Hello and welcome to the Garden of the Black Roses. This is fanfiction. It's my next two chapters of my Ragnarok Online Fanfiction. Just as a pre-chapter, note, because I have typed it in this chapter as well, that in this chapter I've incorporated an idea that I saw in an anime called Rental Magica, where one of the characters, Adelicia, gives one of the main characters, Itsuki, a kiss by biting her lip. She calls it infection magic, so basically it created a link between herself and Itsuki. So I kind of wanted to do something similar with Syao and Chibi. Yeah, I was playing around with it in this chapter. Anyway, let's get into it. Chapter 27. Ready? Phenomenon asked Furama. Just a small section. I know. Furama cast fireball and slowly moved it towards the ice, melting away a perfectly round circle and exposing Lak's forearm. I hope I didn't harm him from that. Buzzing started in their ears. Alastor cast Spirit of Monk. He mentally fell downwards through Lak's spiritual power and landed on a large white circle. Lak? Lak turned to face him, his movements slow. A shadow at the edge of the circle disappeared after whispering, "Good, they heard you." "Will you be all right by yourself?" Lak asked the shadow, while Alastor touched Lak's arm. "I will be. Set flight free for me." Lak gave a nod and turned to look at Alastor. "And be careful. Who will set me free if you don't return?" A giggle faded away, leaving Lak and Alastor alone. Alastor, feeling uneasy about the shadow, assessed Lak and felt spell tags through his spiritual power. "We'll get you out of here." Alastor withdrew out and opened his eyes. Lak's alive. He's been frozen within as well. This is definitely hell's work. Tadakono and Furama slowly melted the ice around Lak. Haru focused his power into Lak, breaking the numerous spell tags that kept his insides frozen. The three eased him to the ground. "How many days has it been since I fell through the doorway?" Lak asked slowly, his teeth chattering from the cold. "It's been over 5 months, Tadakono replied, casting fireball again to try and warm Lak up. What happened? He had a feeling that the copies had been around much longer than they first anticipated. "When we arrived in Rachel," Lak said, holding his hands close to Tadakono's fireball, "within Freya's temple, someone challenged me. This person was strong. I don't mean Kashi type strong. I mean godlike type strong. Even with Chibi supporting me, we were both knocked down. Mike got angry and tried on his own, but was struck down as well. Kei-chan and Iswell fared no better. That's all I remember." He looked around the cavern and noticed the others who were frozen. "Think it's safe to set them free?" "We were thinking it was hell who froze all of you," Kakaki explained, watching Lak get up and press a hand on the remaining ice that held Chibi, Kei-chan, Iswell, and Microx. "We risked defrosting you. We don't know if we should risk defrosting the others until we're certain." "Chibi could be alive," Lak said softly, trying to ease the pain in his head. Silence greeted his words. Want to know how I can tell? He turned to look at them, then waved them over and pointed behind Chibi to her leaf. He looked at Chibi's closed eyes and felt a small tug at his memory he didn't recognize. Homunculi die when their owner's spiritual power is completely gone. In other words, when they are dead. If you defrost Flight, and she's alive, you can bet that Chibi is as well. They gave him a curious stare. Chibi told me that a long time ago. She said it might be useful for me one day. Didn't really want it to know what she meant by that. Tadakono and Furama slowly defrosted Flight. Haru broke the spell tags and they waited. Flight laid motionless on the ground. Lack touched her hand, his eyes willing her to wake up. "Master Lack," she whispered quietly, not moving. "Mistress says to leave her in the ice for now." She moved her hand to touch his cheek. "She says for defrosting me, that you have to look after me." She came close to his ear and whispered, "She says you need to remember how badly injured she was. Leaving her in the ice is safest for now. Because I'm with you, you'll know if anything happens to her." Lack nodded and patted its head. "I don't want to try defrosting the other three," he said, his voice getting stronger the more he moved around. "I don't know if they're alive or anything. I'll wait until I hear from John or Foxy about them." He placed a hand on the section of ice that contained Chibi and whispered, "I'll be back to get you whether you want me to or not." Flight smiled and said, "Mistress says that if you are holding her best interests, then it would be best to leave her there until the moon is in the sky during the day." Lack looked at Flight with a weird expression. "Don't ask me why she said that. She just did." "Good. They were able to get you out," Rena said, giving Lack a hug. "Looks like they could have gotten Chibi out as well, but didn't." Chibi said she needed to stay there. Flight flew and perched herself on Lack's shoulder to listen to the conversation. She said that it was... He looked at Flight. What was it again? That it would be best to leave her there until the moon is in the sky during the day, Flight said, looking at Rena. "Mistress says that you know how she knows that. She says you can tell Lack if you feel it necessary to." Rena raised an eyebrow. Is she sure? And it feels weird that I'm relaying her secrets to Lack with permission from her homunculus. Flight nodded, and Rena sighed. "You know about how Chibi warped her Azoth, right? I was in Chibi's lab one day. I snuck in to Fight Club once because I wanted to know how your guild was so powerful. It was the day she warped it. Ea granted her an ability to see into the future. It was a very short span on it, so she can probably see like half a year in advance at most, and it drains her both mentally and physically when she uses it. She knew I was there, and she made me swear secrecy from you and Ea. Oh, from you. And Ea bound that promise to me. I guess telling you now because Chibi said I could breaks that binding." "So she has Trelawney's power? Only no headaches, but instead she becomes weakened and she can control it?" Lack said in confirmation. "So that's how she knew you were coming to see Fen that day we stormed Loki's castle." Lowering his voice, he added, "Then you know the deal Ea and I made." "You've remembered. But your memory doesn't seem to be complete yet," Rena said, surprised. "Ea thought it was best to seal that information within you and Chibi because she felt bad for forcing you to make that decision. When did you remember? While I was trapped in the ice, Lack replied, closing his eyes. Chibi was able to float into my spiritual power, but I couldn't go to hers. After they melted the ice, my memories of how she could do that came to me. He sighed and opened his eyes again. I would make that decision again. Chibi's power? She doesn't just get weakened, Rena replied, sensing Lack's wish to drop the current subject. She can really only use it 3 times in one day. Any more, and she risks tapping into her spiritual power to see what is ahead. As far as I know, she rarely ever uses it. Rena held up a hand to let him know she knew no more about Chibi's ability. The day the moon is in the sky with the sun is a week from now. The lunar priests in Prontera would know exactly when. Better yet, go visit Chibi's sister, Violi. Both Lack and Flight rolled their eyes. Lack, long time no see. Violi and Kagura held hands with him. Violi gave him a little pinch on the cheek. And how's my older sister? She hasn't come by to see me since I married Kagura. Tadakono, Syao and Phenomenon had decided to accompany Lack to visit the church in Prontera. Kakaki, Ferrari-sin, and Furama headed back to Fight Club to monitor the copy of Lack. Same as always, Violi, Lack said uncertainly. Flight held her hands in front of her face. I wanted to ask, when is the next time the moon is visible in the sky during the day? Is this for one of my sister's workings? Violi asked, shaking hands with Tadakono, Syao and Phenomenon as a greeting. Or something else altogether? Would it matter? Lack asked, trying to avoid telling her Chibi was a block of ice. If it's for one of Chibi's workings, then you'd be helping your sister. If it's for something else, then you don't need to worry about it either. If it's for Chibi's working, Violi said softly, tears forming in her eyes. It means she's either too embarrassed or too stubborn to come see me. Violi looked at Flight and added, I know that she's alive at least. Flight perched herself on Violi's shoulder and whispered to her. Lack sighed and asked Kagura the same question. I'm a solar priestess, hence the red clothing. Only Violi can answer your question. But I understand how she feels. Kei-chan and Gemini haven't come to see me since our wedding. She gave Lack a cheeky smile. Speaking of weddings, why don't you marry Chibi? You're both obviously close. Lack stared at her unsurprised. No matter how many times I hear that, it doesn't change the fact that Chibi and I aren't like that. He watched Violi wipe away tears. Besides, it would feel weird to marry family. Seriously? Kagura said, watching him carefully. You two aren't real family, so why not? We are family, Lack replied, walking away. We became family the day the gods favored us. Kagura followed him to Violi. Lack gave her a pat on the back and asked, There isn't much I can do without the answer. It's 12 days from now. Violi sniffed. Flight gave her a little hug. Can you tell me if she's alright? I'll come by Fight Club headquarters in a fortnight's time, even if she doesn't want to see me. Can you tell me if she's alright? Lack nodded, and Kagura looked sideways at him. What does he mean by becoming family the day the gods favored us? Laika gave Violi a quick hug before leaving with Tadakono, Syao and Phenomenon. They aren't even favored by the same god. He's hiding something. He really doesn't seem any different from the real Lak, Kakaki whispered at the guild meeting. How can we tell the difference when the real one gets here? A gasp spread through the room. What happened? The fake is breaking the guild, Ferrarison said with a shock. The door banged open to reveal Tadakono, Syao, Phenomenon, and the real Lak. This is going to confuse everyone. Why would I break the guild? Lak asked, his copy on the platform. Fight Club is strong. We built ourselves to strength from nothing. Time and time again, we have broken down, but we continue to fight on. He took off one of his gloves and wrapped one of Chibi's blue ribbons around his wrists. Chibs, let me borrow your power. You're my dark side, a copy of myself. I won't let you break what we have worked hard to preserve. Why not break it? The copy replied, coming close to him. Better to go now than fade into the background and not be remembered. It pulled its gloves tight and settled into a fighting position. Let's settle this then. Which side is stronger? Tadakono, Syao, and Phenomenon moved and stood near Kakaki, Ferrarison, and Furama. This isn't going to be good, is it? Furama whispered in Tadakono's ear. Tadakono shook his head and watched Flight hover between the two of them. The blue ribbon was so we can tell he's the real one? The blue ribbon is something else, Tadakono replied, confused. Lak said something about linking to Chibi? I don't know what he means by that, but I guess we'll find out. Lak pressed his lips gently to the ribbon, causing it to glow. He changed to Stalker and paused. I see now. Flight cast Emergency Avoid, increasing his speed. Lak darted and furiously swiped at his copy with twin daggers, forcing it back. You have no idea what I just did. And you can't change into a stalker. Mistress says be careful, Flight whispered in his ear. She says don't turn back to a champion under any circumstances. She stayed behind Lak and cast Heal. Did she see that? Or does she know that? He asked, disappearing into Chase Walk. His voice echoed around the room, because it's something I need to know. She says both. Flight stayed in one spot, not giving away his position. The copy darted at her. Lak smiled and brought his daggers around its neck, slicing its throat. It's not dead yet. I hope I'm not that predictable, he murmured, jumping back and throwing a dagger into its chest. Flight giggled and cast Emergency Avoid again. What? Chibi said I was, didn't she? Flight nodded and floated down to the ground to sit and burst into laughter. Is it dead yet? Flight cocked her head to one side. She's not answering. Lak looked back at his copy and noticed it was melting. Flight flew over to him and whispered quietly in his ear. Mistress says the one who attacked you is in the cabin right now. She can see his face clearly. Lak pretended she didn't say anything and went up onto the stage to explain what just happened to the guild. Keep me informed on what she sees, he murmured quietly to Flight. I can't get to her at the moment. Lak began to address the congregation before him. Flight stayed near his ear, whispering, She says you may need to get there as soon as possible, with as many guild members that you can trust. She says that you're going to have a hard time defeating him. Lack made a little movement with his hand, and Flight continued. She says it's Contra. Chapter 28. Contra walked through the ice cavern, looking at the blocks of ice. Feels good to be free again, doesn't it? A female voice reverberated around the room. I had a hard time getting past the bindings the hidden gods had put in place. Hell, Contra said calmly. Why freeze them? And where's Lack? I thought we froze him as well. As expected, Hell said, sitting on the remains of the ice that had held Lack. He was able to summon his guild members here to free him. She looked at Chibi. What I don't understand is why they didn't free her. They know she's alive because her homunculus is no longer here. Summoning a red bullet of fire, she shot it into the ice. It burrowed deep, disappearing into Chibi's chest. She's smart. Be careful around her when they defrost her. Oh, why frozen? Contra asked again, watching the blood drip out of the hole Hell made. Why not just kill them? Because the gods will come after me next, if they notice a lot of high seats and powerful guilds disappearing at once, Hell replied, breaking off a spike of frozen blood. I'm not like my father. I'll do things properly in his stead. Flight fell to the ground, trembling. Lack crouched down and turned her over. Mistress, Flight murmured as Tadakono, Phenomenon and Syao approached the stage to pick up where Lack left off. The guild's murmurs could be heard clearly by Lack. You're all dismissed, he said in an angry tone. I will call you to meet again later, after my desire to kill all of you is gone. All talking froze at his words. A mad scramble, and everyone disappeared out of the room before Lack had a chance to look up at them. Kakaki, Ferrari Sin, Furama, Bright Eyes, Mina, and Illusions joined Lack. Mistress is hurt, Flight said, when Lack picked her up. Mistress says you need to get there now. Repairing an angry guild can wait. She says there won't be anything left if you don't get there. Hell fired another bullet into the ice holding Iswell. This blood will serve the purposes my father had intended it for. Which was, Contra asked, breaking a frozen shard of blood from Kei-chan. And what good will it do if you don't have Lack's blood as well? There's time for that. She took the shard from Contra and fired bullets into Micrex and the 3 mediators. But we need to do this quickly. Contra retrieved the shards from Iswell and Micrex, while Hell took the shards from the mediators. Let's go. Contra took a hold of Hell's hand and they disappeared in a whirl of snow. Moments later, Lack and his entourage from the meeting room appeared through a warp portal. Pressing his hand on the ice holding Chibi, he closed his eyes. His mind fell through a dark space to land into a white circle of light. Chibi? Outside, his body froze with a light, icy aura. Tadakono and Phenomenon placed a hand on Lack's shoulders, worried. Lack, come on. Tadakono also froze. Phenomenon pulled away quickly, noticing that it was contagious. What is going on? Tadakono stood next to Lack on the circle of light. Where are we? he asked, noticing a shadow on the outskirts of the circle. What was that? You touched me outside, didn't you? Lack replied, sensing Tadakono nod. I fell into my own spiritual power. You must have been drawn in as well. He extended his hand out towards the shadow. Why not come closer? And kill myself? A familiar voice said. Your power is holy, remember? Unless you want me to be dead before you set me free, I'll stay here. Chibi? Tadakono said in surprise. But how? It's a secret I don't want you to tell anyone else, Lack said sharply. It's not something I believe is going to be good for anyone knowing. He looked at the shadow, which flickered in response, then turned to Tadakono. The day Chibi warped Azoth, Ia visited me. She asked me if I wanted to become Chibi's anchor to the human world. She told me some of what Chibi had done and how she had healed her. I knew that Chibi would become something different if I said no. There are benefits. I can use her power as physical strength, and she can enter my spiritual power to talk to me directly. I felt bad, though, for making Ia need to ask him, Chibi said softly. I asked her to seal the memory away in Lack, so it would be just that we're close friends. When we were frozen in the ice, I felt it was time to remind Lack about the deal he made with Ia. I lent him my power, which in turn gave him enough strength to call Kakaki, Ferrari-san and Furama here. Then, Tadakono's eyes widened. You asked Lack to free your leaf, and it became a link that allowed you to talk to Lack and tell him what was happening here. Feeling something jar his physical body, he added, If we don't pull out of here soon, Lack, they're going to find out this secret. Can I free you now? Lack asked Chibi quickly, letting Tadakono go first. Is there a reason you saw why you should stay here? Chibi shook her head. Then I'll get them to defrost you. Have you been able to contact the others or assist them in any way? I'm only connected to you in this way, Lack, Chibi replied, her voice letting him know she wasn't amused. I can't contact them even if I burst an artery trying. Hearing people call out Lack's name, she added, Go. Lack! Tadakono gave Lack a shake that looked harder than it was. Snap out of it. What happened? Phenomenon asked Tadakono. Internally, Tadakono cringed. He hated lying to one of his friends. The ice. Because Lack has been frozen by it before, the spell tried to take him again when he touched it. I was pulled in when I touched him, so I managed to burn away the connections before they could take serious hold. He should be coming out of it soon. Lack moved his hands away, his ears catching the last of Tadakono's lie. He pretended to wobble and sat down hard on the ground. Looking up at Tadakono, he said, Thanks. No problem, Tadakono replied, casting Fireball and holding it near Lack to warm him up. Furama did the same. We should free Chibi before she gets more injured from being here. Lack nodded. Bright Eyes, Ferrari-san, and Illusions broke away the ice with their jaws until it was a thin outline around Chibi. Furama stood and melted the remaining ice. She fell forwards. Furama caught her and held her close. Mina cast Heal, and Furama focused his attention on destroying all the spell tags in her body with Spell Break. Don't heal me, Chibi said, shivering. I know I'm hurt, but don't heal me. Mina continued on, and looked at Chibi shocked. Lack held up his hand to stop Mina. Flight floated over and healed Chibi instead. Lack... I know, he said softly. It's alright. Nothing to worry about. Let's get you home. He looked around the cabin. Neither John Flora nor Foxy had contacted him about their guild masters. Let's see where this goes. Lack sat on his chair in the dining room. On his immediate left, the chair remained empty, and then, next to that, sat Phenomenon. On his right, Tadakono and Syao sat. She's skipping a meal again, Lack murmured to no one in particular. Flight came and sat in Chibi's chair, her eyes overbright. You're hiding something too. Not really, Flight replied. Lack felt a small tug in his power, like someone was pulling his shirt gently to get his attention. Flight noticed his expression. Mistress says don't follow. She sent me here so you know if anything happens to her. She says you need to focus on getting the guild to understand what is happening. You better tell me if something might happen before it does, he growled angrily. Just where did she go, anyway? The Alchemist Society in Aldebaran. Chibi landed hard in a crouch before dodging a bomb from her copy. Yukiko and Mazenda pitched potions to her. Strapping to her right wrist in place of her glove, strapped to her right wrist in place of her glove was one of Lack's insignia gloves. She threw acid bottles at her copy in quick succession. What's wrong? Her copy said with a smile. We're equally matched. There's no way you can defeat yourself. It spun and sliced through all the bottles before they hit her. We're the strongest in this society. You've never had to fight an alchemist stronger than yourself before. Chibi didn't answer and drew her sword and swung it in a downward arc. Her copy locked swords with her. Chibi pulled back her right arm and punched hard before bringing her sword around and slicing it across the chest. It can't see Lack's glove. She brought herself close and brought her right fist up hard into the copy's chest. The copy gasped, breathless, and thrust her sword at Chibi. I can't rely on it. She's as good with the sword as I am. Chibi threw out a bomb at her copy, forcing them both to go flying. Flight cringed and shook slightly. It's nothing, she whispered, knowing Lack just looked at her. Mistress is battling her copy. A clatter of cutlery told her Lack had dropped what he was holding. She has your insignia glove. You'll know before I do if she needs you. She nicked it from my room, didn't she? Lack said, surprised at his own calmness. He felt the tug again and sighed. How will I know? Flight waited, and Lack suddenly felt like he was going to be pulled inside out. She needs you, Flight replied, once the feeling had disappeared. Chibi stood and leaned on her sword. Her copy stood on the other end of the room, watching her. She straightened shakily and noticed Lack's glove. Aya! He's gonna come now! The glove had been cut like it had been halfway through a shredder. I better try and finish this before he comes. Yukiko and Mazenda retreated to the doorway and pitched potions at her again to heal her. Chibi leapt at her copy and they fought furiously. She could feel her leaf coming closer and closer to the building. Her copy noticed her slight distraction and threw a bomb at her. Chibi noticed the bomb only seconds before impact. She flew backwards and hit the wall near the door hard before falling forwards onto the floor. Yukiko came forwards and poured white potions all over her. "Chibi," she said, shaking her. "Chibi." Looking up, she saw the copy coming towards them. "Chibi, wake up!" Chibi opened her eyes and took Yukiko's hand. "Whatever happens, don't let Lack into this room." She took off the insignia glove and gave it to Yukiko. "He's coming because he could sense this was damaged. I can feel flight entering the building." Chibi stood up and staggered towards pulling on her own glove. "Don't let them into this room." Yukiko nodded and watched Chibi leap at her copy again. She retreated back to Mazenda. "If you were told to do something, even if it's against your better judgment, even if you know that person is going to get hurt, would you do what you were told, or what you think is right?" "This is about Chibi, isn't it?" Mazenda replied. Yukiko nodded. "If Lack is coming," she glanced down at the shredded glove, "then she probably told you not to let him in here. While I agree that it will be dangerous to let him defeat her copy, it will be more dangerous to let her die by her copy's hand. The copy becomes reality, if that's the case." The room rocked. They could both feel flight moving up the hallway towards them. "Lack," Yukiko said softly, as Mazenda darted in to pitch potions at Chibi. "There's something you should know before you decide whether to go in there or not." She held up his glove to him. "And what is that?" he asked, watching Flight also fly in to aid Chibi. He took the glove and placed it in his pocket without looking at it. "If you are the one to defeat Chibi's copy," Yukiko said softly, "then Chibi herself is in danger. But if she is killed by her copy, the copy becomes reality. You must help her, become her support." Mazenda slid back to the doorway, out of breath. Kashi floated down to the ice cavern with Novus. "So here's where you three have been," he said softly. "I've been worried about you." Giving Novus a sharp look, he added, "Don't tell them I was worried." Novus lifted his hands in response. "Renna's report to you was right about their location." Kashi summoned numerous fireballs to dance around the bodies of the three mediators, melting the ice. Novus checked the three over and cast Spellbreak to remove all of the spell tags. Shadow opened her eyes first and tested all of her joints and wings. Balos and Black Rose moved, opening their eyes and stretching. "Morning, Kashi," Shadow said with a smile. Kashi gave her an angry glare. "Before you say anything, Loki was the one that froze us here. We couldn't have broken out even if we wanted to." "Let's talk at the castle," Kashi replied, noticing each had a similar wound in their chests. "I assume you can fly there?" Black Rose flapped her wings hard and hovered off the ground. "Well," Black Rose said, with a similar smile to Shadow's, "we can fly at least." Kashi gave her a thump on the head in response. You did ask, Black Rose added, painfully holding her head. Let's just get going, Nervous intervened. Palador is waiting for us up at the castle. We need to hold a meeting to discuss the recent events that have taken place. Kashi nodded in agreement. Chibi knelt on the ground, breathing hard. Her copy seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. Flight hovered close to her ear. Mistress, the pieces. I know, Chibi replied, struggling to her feet. Her copy laughed hard at her struggle. But that means you could be supported properly now, Flight said, worriedly looking at the cuts and bruises all over Chibi's body. I can't keep up healing you. A rush of power enveloped Chibi, healing her completely. She looked around. Lack gave her a wink. I can. He pulled his gloves tight, but stayed in a normal standing position. I'll support you, but on one condition. Chibi narrowed her eyes at him. If you become too badly injured, then I'm going to kill it for you. If you say so, Chibi murmured, standing and straightening her skirt. Flight cast Emergency Avoid on Chibi, and she darted in to attack her copy. It seems stronger now. Were the pieces adding to my strength before? Chibi locked swords with it. She drew Azoth and slashed it across the chest and waist. She seems weaker now, Lack said to Flight. He cast Heal, Blessing, and Agility on Chibi. It doesn't make sense. It does, a voice whispered in his ear. Lack smiled, knowing full well who the voice belonged to. Her pieces are gone now. Being left in the ice a bit longer than you gave her spiritual power a chance to heal without interference. What I want to know is, do you want me to leave the connection between you two in place? Other than being convenient? Lack asked, watching Flight cast Emergency Avoid to increase Chibi's attack speed. Is there any other purpose it's serving? You mean current or potential? Lack moved aside to let a bomb aimed at him go flying past. It has no current purpose, but you know Chibi, she loves to experiment. So it does have a potential to keep her human if anything like Azoth happens again. Then leave it, Lack replied, catching Chibi as she flew backwards from the impact of a bomb. You're getting yourself beaten up out there. I can't seem to muster my strength anymore, she cried. He could see tears in her eyes. It's getting really difficult. I don't know why. They both heard a sigh. You're used to using the strength from the pieces. Chibi's ears twitched in response. Your actual strength hasn't been used in a very long time. It needs work to get back to the way it was. Yeah, Chibi said angrily. You're saying I have no way of defeating my copy? Correct, she replied, her voice relaying a degree of cheerfulness. Chibi pulled out of Lack's arms and stalked towards her copy, thoroughly angry. Lack smothered a laugh. You did that on purpose. What I said is true, ER replied. But it's also true that when she's angry, she gets stronger and can tap into that strength faster. A gust of wind blew near him. I'll come by Fight Club later. Lack smiled and healed Chibi when he caught her the second time. Want me to defeat it for you? He asked, with mock concern in his voice. Just adding fuel to the fire. Just stay as support, Chibi snapped, and darted back, catching her copy by surprise, and cutting into its arms, and finally thrust her sword deep into its chest. She stood and pulled her sword out. Her copy fell to the floor and began to melt away. Tadakono, Syao and Phenomenon sat listening to the concerns of various guildsmen. There isn't much we can do. Until Lack and Chibi tie up the loose ends from their copies, you can't expect them to drop everything in case it affects the guild itself. But it's like they're neglecting us, a sniper said, pulling on her pigtails. How are we supposed to feel? Patience, Shaoran replied with a sigh. His ears twitched, hearing a sound in the distance. They'll be here soon. Lack stepped into the foyer. With a deep breath, he walked off towards the dining room. Chibi watched him leave the room before sitting down hard on the spot. Flight floated near her. Mistress? Enough, Flight, Chibi said, her voice a little strained. Stay with Lack. A voice called out in her head. Once I've rested, I have to head off somewhere. If Lack asks where I am, tell him I'm resting and I don't want to be disturbed. Nothing else. Understand? Flight nodded and flew off after Lack. The voice called out to her again. I know. I'll be there soon. Oh my god, I'm talking to myself in my head. She sighed and leaned back against the door. Mistress is resting, Flight answered Lack. That aside, she motioned to the Fight Club guildsmen entering the meeting room and taking their places. Phenomenon and Shaoran went up and stood with Lack. Where's Tadakono? Lack asked, looking over the congregation before him. And Furama. Tada said he had something he needed to do, Shaoran replied, watching the last trickle into the room. I don't know about Furama. I'll ask Kakaki about it later, Lack said, motioning Phenomenon to take their places at the long table. Now then. Chibi walked through the ice cave with Tadakono and Furama. I'm sorry for pulling you away from the guild meeting, Chibi said quietly to them, but this isn't something I can do alone. Lack is better able to correct the dissension in the guild better than I can. And with Hell and Contra possibly attacking us soon, I want to free those I'm sure that can be freed. But freeing Mike? Tadakono said, as they neared the cavern. Are you sure? I don't know how, Chibi replied, as the voice called out to her. But I can hear him. Chibi pressed her hand against the ice. I just need one more piece of proof. You can hear me, can't you? A voice answered in her head. You've done it before. My tattoo? She removed her glove from her right hand. It flickered before becoming bright, then dulling to its original faded color. Tadakono and Furama stared at her. We'll set him free, Chibs. They moved her gently aside and set to work. How was he able to still control your tattoo? I thought that once you change guilds, the guild master can't contact you via it. He did it before, Chibi replied, replacing the glove on her hand. We went to see him, remember? Tadakono nodded. Chibi smoothed her glove to remove the wrinkles and continued. I have some theories on how he does it, but none seem really reliable. Mike-Rex sat shivering violently, his armor ice cold against his skin. I can do it only if Chibi has Azoth on her. At least that's what Loki told me while I was under his control. Azoth is in my bedroom at headquarters, Chibi replied, and I didn't have Azoth on me the day we came to visit you. So, as usual, he lied. That was one of my theories, but the second point, and now this right here, disproved that theory. Then I'm out of ideas as well, Mike-Rex said, getting up and hopping from one foot to the other, attempting to warm up. Noticing Chibi's distant expression, he asked, Anything I should know? You probably have a copy, Chibi replied, focusing her eyes back on him. And it's probably why they haven't heard your call. They assume it's your copy being mean. Your copy is your opposite. You need to defeat it yourself. If anyone kills it, let's just say it doesn't have pleasant effects. If you happen to be killed by your copy, it becomes reality. So keep that in mind as well. She held out her hand to him. If I have a copy and I turn up, Mike-Rex said suddenly, they'll think I'm the copy. That's why we're coming with you, Chibi replied. Tadakono and Furama's eyes opened wide, hearing that for the first time. I'm not in the mood to be destroyed by Contra and Hell, so the less copies and the more people we can gather to fight is best. But with your copy leading Velvet Touch of Inishi, we'll have enemies instead of allies. A faint tone of hurt flowed through her words. Lack flopped down into his chair, watching a finally satisfied guild leaving the meeting room. Chibi never came. She didn't really need to rest that long. He got up and walked out of the door towards her room. Flight flew in front of him and spread her arms wide. She said she didn't want to be disturbed. Lack looked at her with narrow eyes. She doesn't want to be disturbed. Where did Chibi go this time? Lack asked, his voice low and angry. Where did she go and not tell me? Flight tilted her head to one side, as if to hear something that Lack couldn't. Mistress says it's all right. She's safe with Tadakono and Furama. Flight trailed off, just as Chibi had with her. And, Lack said, his voice low, she's with someone else as well? She says don't worry, Flight replied again. She says she'll call on you if she needs your help, but she doesn't expect that she'll need it yet. She says you need to worry more on getting the guild stronger because the likelihood of Contra or Hell, or both, attacking is high. Nothing you can do, Phenomenon said, giving Lack a pat on the back. If Chibi is doing what she needs to do, then you need to ensure that you keep the guild safe too. Syao and I will give you a hand. Chibi walked through the familiar halls of Velvet Touch of Inishi, nostalgia playing on her mind. Pressing a hand on John Flora's room, She paused before knocking softly. "Come in," a voice called from inside. Chibi opened the door and was confronted with a very surprised John Flora. "How?" "Mike gave me permission to enter for his sake," Chibi replied, closing the door behind her. "You've noticed it, haven't you? Mike's unusual behavior?" John Flora looked at her curiously and sat on his bed, patting next to him, inviting Chibi to sit also. "The Mike that's been here since returning from Nameless Island is a copy of himself. If I was to guess correctly, he would be the opposite to the Mike you know. Cruel, bloodthirsty, uncaring. Am I hitting the nail on the head so far?" "But what do you propose I do?" John Flora asked, looking closely at Chibi. If what she says is true, then there's a possibility that this isn't really Chibi either, since she went through the same doorway as Mike. "The real Mike is outside," Chibi replied, knowing full well what John Flora was thinking. "Go ask the copy if he gave me permission to walk the halls. If he says no, then you have your answer. If he says yes, then you have to come back here to kill me. Sounds reasonable?" "How can I guarantee you aren't going to run off while I do that?" John Flora asked, watching her carefully and weighing his options on defeating her if she proved to be a doppelganger or some other evil being. "You know the answer to that already," Chibi replied, taking off her glove to reveal her faded butterfly tattoo. "You have more power in this building than I do. You can easily manipulate the door to hold me in." John Flora got up and pressed his hand on his bedroom door. His butterfly tattoo shone brightly, leaving a seal on the outside of the door. "I'll be back." He opened the door and closed it behind him. The wood of the door and the frames entwined with each other to form a solid seal. What am I going to do? If she's real, then I can't let her be harmed, or both Lack and Mike will kill me. If she's fake, I can't take her on myself. He walked towards Microrex's and Gemini's bedroom. Opening the door, he looked in briefly. Where could he be? The sound of crying brought his attention to the corner of the room. Gemini? "John!" Gemini burst into fresh tears. Mike said he doesn't want me around anymore." John Flora's eyes widened. Gemini held on to him tightly and continued to cry. "Where did he go, Gemini?" he asked gently, stroking her hair. "I have a sneaking suspicion that the Mike we have here is a fake. I'm going to find out if I'm right." Gemini stopped crying and looked up at him with renewed hope. "I think he went to the training room," she said with a hiccup. "I hope you're right." She got up and pulled herself together. "I'm coming too." They walked down towards the training room, sounds of metal ringing out loudly. John Flora and Gemini looked in to find Microrex bearing down on Kaya, in a very one-sided battle. John Flora ran and supported Kaya. Microrex growled angrily and brought his spear hard down on the two of them. "It's true. I don't need to ask him. Chibi was right." He and Kaya moved around the room, evading Microrex's attack. When they neared the door, John called out to Gemini. "Go to my room. Release the person in there. She'll help you work out what needs to be done." John Flora watched her run off out of the corner of his eye. "Hurry, Gemini." Chibi's ears twitched, hearing quick footsteps approaching the door. She moved away and sat at John Flora's desk. Gemini burst in and froze. Chibi. I take it John got his answer. Chibi got up and took her hand. We don't have much time. Come with me. She dragged the stunned Gemini down the hall and out the door to where Furama, Tadakono, and Mike Rex stood waiting. John's probably fighting your shadow. Gemini pulled out of Chibi's grasp and stood away from Mike Rex. How did you know that? I guessed. Since you were the one that came to free me from John's room, Chibi replied, not looking at Gemini. Assuming that John possibly can't fight his brother on his own, Mike's copy must have gone to the training room after he spoke to you, possibly attacking whoever's in there practicing. How do you know he spoke to me? I must have had good timing. Chibi looked at Gemini. Considering your face is still damp, you had been crying. The copy must have said or done something really mean to cause you to cry, because you don't look physically hurt. She looked back to Mike Rex and added, You better go rescue John and the other guild member before they either die by your copy or kill your copy. She glanced back at Gemini and walked over, pulling one of her ribbons out of her hair. What are you doing? She cried, trying to grab the ribbon back. Chibi stepped away from Gemini's hands and came over to Mike Rex. Bring the point down, she said to him, with a slight commanding tone in her voice. Mike Rex raised an eyebrow, then lowered his spear. Chibi wrapped the ribbon around the shaft of the spear, ending with a bow. She brought out 2 coating bottles and coated his armor and spear, so we can tell you apart from your copy. Mike Rex nodded and motioned for them to go inside. This is bad. John Flora cast Kiri Elysion on himself and Kaya. The butterfly tattoo on himself glowed brightly. Mike? Kaya, he said quickly, as Kaya cast Sightless Raid. We're gonna fall back to the door. Kaya nodded and they moved back. Mike? Kaya said in surprise as he moved back through the doorframe. Noticing a smaller blue figure at his side, his eyes widened even more in surprise. Chibi. Anything else I need to know? Mike Rex asked her quickly. John Flora cast defensive spells over everyone. Anything you've left out? Your copy is you, Chibi replied, throwing bombs to surround the doorway to buy them some time. You need to think of ways to defeat yourself. It'll be a difficult battle, but your weaknesses that you know of are the same for the copy. If you catch your copy in a weakness, then it's a sure win for you. The same goes for it, so be careful. Mike Rex and John Flora leapt over the flames and into the room. Chibi kept the flames up as a barrier between those with her and the battle ahead. Kaya leaned against her with a smile. I haven't seen you in a long time. You and Mike seem to be civil to each other now. Not completely, Chibi replied, watching Mike throw his copy across the room. There are still some things between us that keeps us from being friends, but as comrades, that's a different story altogether. Isn't that the same thing? Tadakono asked, cutting Kaya off. He looked apologetically at Kaya and continued, Comrades and friends, aren't they the same thing? The idea is, but the structure isn't. Chibi replied, throwing out more bombs. Friends are 2 or more people who can sit and talk and hang out and basically have fun in each other's company. Comrades, on the other hand, are different. If you're in battle, you'd look for the person you can trust to watch your back, and know that they trust you to watch theirs. Arguments, friendships, fun, they don't enter the equation. In a battle, your main instinct is to survive, and if there's someone who can help you reach that goal, then you go for it, even if that person is your worst enemy. Her eyes darkened and flickered, as if looking at something moving near her fast. Chibi? Furama and Tadakono gave her a small shake. Chibi, the flames are dying down. Chibi watched the scene in her head. I don't remember activating my ability. She could sense Tadakono and Furama moving away from her to stand in front and cast Stormgust and Lord of Vermilion, respectively, as a barrier against the battle. Kaya and Gemini took over, shaking her. She couldn't respond or snap out of her vision. You activated it, didn't you, Io? Without warning me. She focused onto the vision. This isn't good. I'm gonna have to intervene. Chibi snapped out of her vision and darted through Tadakono's Stormgust toward Mike Rex's copy. Time slowed as Chibi approached. She drew 4 acid bottles and threw them at Mike Rex's copy before circling back behind Mike Rex and John Flora to the door. For a second, her eyes caught Mike Rex's. Mike Rex nodded and brought his spear through the 4 bottles, causing the contents to spill over the copy. The acid began to eat away at the metal on the copy's body and spear. Mike Rex brought his spear up and impaled his copy through the heart. Chibi returned and ran directly into Tadakono's arms. Why did you do that? He whispered, as everyone cheered with excitement at Mike Rex's victory. You didn't respond to us, and then you just moved so quickly like you were the one on fire. I saw Mike's death, Chibi said quietly. My ability from Io was activated. I'm pretty sure it was Io herself who did it, because I didn't do it. So I made it easier for him to defeat his copy. And that's it. My hand has gone to sleep. Okay. Up. But yeah. These chapters I think are starting to get longer. I mean, this audio file now is an hour. So they are getting longer. I might start doing individual recordings. There is about 10 chapters left, so we'll see how we go. But yeah, as always, like, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you want me to write more of this one or any of the other fan fictions. I have explained in another video, but I will explain in a blog video as well, eventually in March, when I get to it. How the layout of my uploads is going to be. But yeah, let me know what you would like to see. What stories you'd like me to try and continue. But yeah, that's it. And as always, let your imagination grow wild. Bye for now.